Have you ever been stuck in that position where you've kind of amassed enough sourdough starter that you could actually open your own bakery? I've become increasingly frustrated and annoyed with the amount of flour that I'm using just to maintain the starter. Not to bake, just to maintain the starter. I've kept what can only be described as a mini cauldron of sourdough starter bubbling away in my fridge so that I'm ready to bake at any given moment. But the problem for me is that my schedule changes all of the time, so I'm not always able to bake. Couple that with some crazy feeding routine and I'm wasting way too much flour. So for me, things needed to change. Now, if you're a new baker, I'm also hoping that this is going to demonstrate that we don't need to waste lots of flour or have any crazy routines to maintain a sourdough starter. And most importantly, we're going to save time and money. So a few months ago, I was watching the Bake with Jack channel and he uses a scrapings method where he retains the scraps in the jar and he uses those to kick off his next starter. I loved it. I mean, I was hooked. The seed was sown, but all I needed to do was work out how this could fit in with my baking schedule. Now I wanted to clean up everything. I didn't want big jars in my fridge. I didn't want lots of starter kicking around, and I definitely didn't want to be wasting as much flour. So the first step for me was to actually work out how much starter I needed to make on a daily basis to bake my bread. So each day I bake one loaf of bread using 750 grams of dough. I use 98 grams of starter to get that dough going. Now I can fit that 98 grams easily into a little jam jar, which means I can already get rid of that huge 1 litre Kilner jar that I've been using up until now. I needed to do a test run and I needed to kind of replicate this scrapings method. So I just took a teaspoon of my existing starter, added it to my new little jar and then added 55 grams of water and 55 grams of flour. That would give me enough starter to make my main dough and have enough scrapings left over ready for the next feed. Now I've only used 1 teaspoon to kick this off, so I knew it was going to take some time to ferment and it actually took 9 hours. So now I had a rough plan and my new baking schedule would look something like this. So at 9 o'clock at night, I grab my jar with the scrapings, I add 55 grams of water, 55 grams of flour, give it a quick mix up, pop the lid on the top and then leave it out at room temperature. When I get up in the morning at 6:30, I'm ready to bake. That starter is ready to go. And as soon as I've used it in the main dough, I pop a lid on it, leave it on the worktop and I feed it again that night. Now I actually showed you how I incorporate that into my daily baking schedule in last week's video. But many of you asked, well, if I'm not baking bread on a daily basis, will this still work? And yes, it will. Just pop that jar with the lid on it in the fridge and then bring it out when you're ready to feed it. So I haven't tested how long these scrapings will actually last in the fridge without feeding. They've obviously got the potential to dry out because there's not a lot of starter in the jar. I will be testing that soon and I'll keep you updated. But in the meantime, if I wanted to keep this starter and I wasn't going to be using it for a month or more, I'd probably make a small batch up, maybe about 50 grams, pop that in the fridge and I would be confident it wouldn't dry out. But of course, if you've got any experience keeping these scrapings for a long time, then do let me know in the comments. Now, another question I got after last week's video was, can I take the scrapings method and make a big jar of starter? So I thought, well, I'll give it a whirl. In my fridge, I've got a starter and it hadn't been fed for 4 weeks, so I thought this was the perfect thing to test it on. I took 5 grams of it, I added it to a 1 litre Kilner jar, added 250 grams of water, 250 grams of flour, gave it a quick mix, popped the lid on it and left it to see what happened. And 24 hours later, I had a really active starter. Now for me, this just goes to demonstrate that if you've got a good strong starter, we don't need crazy feeding schedules or to waste lots of flour just to keep these starters maintained. Quick update for everybody who signed up to receive my sourdough recipe calculator. That will be sent out to you by email towards the end of the month. I'll leave some details in the video description. And if you didn't see last week's video, I'm basically putting together a sourdough recipe calculator with the help of a viewer called Ovi, and I'm going to send it out to my email subscribers. It's in a basic form at the moment, but I'm hoping with your feedback we can make a few tweaks and kind of build something together. So details will be in the description. Now I think this scrapings method is fantastic. A huge thank you to the Bake with Jack channel. This is excellent if you're baking 1 to 2 loaves a day and 0 wastage. And if you want to see how this can fit in with a baking schedule, then check out this video here. A huge thank you for watching. I'll see you again very soon. Stay tuned.